and some that we wanted specific significance to it. I'm supposed to run through the program with you, comrade, in preparation. After I'm finished here, you will see that our sister Ajay, who is a member of the Global African Congress, but is also doing international work on behalf of the Global African Congress, in a recent visit to India, and she'll be giving a report back on that trip, and something that I think you will particularly enjoy, because I think the knowledge about our people outside of the continent is something that is still outstanding by many of our people. Later on there will be a panel discussion where members of the RMT and members of Global African Congress, and we hope we will be joined by members of the March Committee to say whether they feel, given the power shift in the global political situation, our struggle for reparation, is it more or less likely now with Trump in the White House supporting his racist comrades, or Theresa May in her inept way of dealing with things here, or indeed the recent issues of Brexit? Are these things that will help us go forward as far as our struggle on reparation is concerned? And there will be time, obviously, for the audience participation. Our keynote speaker was to have included a comrade from Nigeria. And those of you who have been to this conference a number of times will remember that one way or the other, the British state always tried to sabotage this conference and attendance to this conference. We have invited people from Haiti, and if you can imagine, it was immediately after the earthquake. They wouldn't let the comrade in. In fact, they granted the visa and then took it back and then granted it again after the conference. These are the things that's gone on. A comrade from Nigeria has been applying for his visa since the beginning of July, and today he still has no reply, despite the fact that he is paid for that visa. Thankfully, because of their colonialist achievement, our comrade here from Barbados has made it safely through. I don't think we needed a visa, did we, David? So they can only partially interfere with the effort we're making here. The format of this event is clearly, we want to build connection with our family on the continent and those in the diaspora. That's a very simple, straightforward format. We try every year to get someone from the continent and someone from the diaspora and make that link. I've known David for a number of years, and I think that he will fill in the gap adequately for us to go away with a better understanding of where we are going as far as reparation is concerned. If I can quickly touch on the rest of the brochure, comrades, we've done a profile of the comrade from Nigeria, and you will see there that he's also sent us a recording. I'm in the process of trying to see if we can play some of it at some point so you can at least hear from him. We should perhaps have thought of some live link, but that's another matter. On page 8, and I was here, a number of you were here last night, there was an event here about enslavement, and it always surprised me, and I say this, and I think I say it every time I'm here, that we have a situation where people are producing events in what I consider hollow ground in regards to Bernie Grant's legacy and his remembrance. Yesterday, I heard very little reference to Bernie Grant. There was an attempt at a calypso song, which I thought was quite good, but nonetheless, it's important that at every opportunity we do take the time to remember Bernie, and we have made sure that we've done so on page 8. Currently, the situation in Grenfell is still there and hasn't been resolved. We do this collage, I understand. I'm not familiar with the phrase, but I'm told it's a collage of photographs, which I think tells a story. So I would ask that you take time to also look at that and see how we will proceed about the history of today. So, comrade, there's a 30-minute and I'll leave that to you. Thank you.
Greetings, everyone. My name is Haja. My full name is Nana Haja Salifu, and I'm from Ghana originally. And my grandfather is Salifu. He was a Chief Superintendent Police Officer before he was assassinated in 1964 when they were trying to assassinate President Kwame Nkrumah. So they shot him 7 times, and the 7th bullet hit his back of his head, so he died protecting the president. So I'm the founder of Salifu Degati Foundation. That is a charity to promote and protect the people of African and African descent and our history here in England. And I'm also a founder of Dakati Community Interest Company. That is an agriculture company that also help agriculture farmers in villages across the globe, working together with them. And then I'm also a member of the Global African Congress and then also the Social Enterprise Club of the Northampton University. Okay. 2014, we had a visit from the city community. His name is Mohan. He came to the RMT conference here in August, and he told us about the cities, that means the African Indians in India. And these African Indians are actually Africans. They are not the Dalits, and they are not the untouchable. I'm sorry to say that. It's different from what the media and what everybody thinks what the city actually is. Okay, so the cities are Africans, they are also descendants of Africans who live in India. And to their knowledge, what they know that they've been living in India since existing of time. That is what they think. But what the cities are also told that they are brought there to India as slaves. But the cities themselves cannot tell you that is correct or not. They will say that all they know is that they live here in India, they were born here and they exist here, all the way to their ancestors. That is what they can tell you. But according to the Indian, if I say Indian, I will say Indian different caste. So the other type of Indians tells them that they were brought there as slaves. And you can find these cities across Karnataka, that is in the south of India. Gujarat is a little bit in the middle going to the north. And then Maharashtra is where Mumbai and in the central of India is Andhra Pradesh. Goa is where the seaside is, and Tamil Nadu is in the south of India. That is where you find the city across. And the cities in India doesn't only stop there. It goes all the way to Pakistan, and cities are also there in Pakistan. All the way to Sri Lanka, you will find cities there. They call them cities. And I don't know where the term cities come from. So I tried to look into where the cities came from. It looks like they used to use it for the Africans who used to come to India to trade. They used the word for them cities. So the Indians gave them this name as cities. So you will find Indians there, the cities there in India, and they all live in the villages. They live in the forest. They don't live in towns. There are towns and there are villages, but this village is different. It is a typical forest. It's like a forest whereby they have decided to build their own houses to make it a town in the forest. Okay. When I first went to India and I went to see the city community, I was shocked. They were shocked. We were all shocked because they were looking at me and touching me, and I'm looking at them and I'm staring at them. They wanted me to take off my scarf so they can touch my hair to see if I look exactly like them. That is the question they asked me. They said to me, you look like me, but you don't speak like me, but I want to know if your hair is like me. So I remove my scarf and then I show it to them, and I told them that I look the same like them. We are the same, we're not different. And that is what got these cities interested in me, and they wanted to open up to talk to me. But the cities were a bit angry. They were very, very angry towards me. They were angry towards the situation that they are living in, because the cities cannot cross certain borders. We live in different places and we have obstacles, but the city's obstacles are really something that we cannot even imagine. So what I did is I tried to find out what is the situation for cities, men, women, children, within the political and the economic and social justice in India. The cities have no political justice, they have no social justice, and they have no economic justice or awareness or anything, because they can do nothing. Cities only obey the other caste of India. There are different types of India. The untouchable are the Dalits. People will tell me that the untouchable are the cities, but the cities are not the untouchable. The untouchable are the Dalits, and the cities are the slaves. That is how in India, most of the people, when you ask them about the cities, they'll tell you, oh, they are the slaves from Africa, but they will never say that they are the untouchables. So the cities actually don't do nothing. They only work for the untouchable. They work for the Dalits. That is the life for the cities. So it's very difficult and very complex to know what the city can actually do, because they can't do nothing except be in the forest. They are very survival and powerful in the forest, but they're not free and powerful outside the forest. Only few of the cities that started 2003, some of African missionary students went to India, and when they came across the cities, they started taking them to missionary schools where they can learn English and where they can have an education. And they got trouble. The African students who supported the cities got into trouble. Some of them were deported out of the country, because it is not actually permissible for the cities to go to school, to learn English, because in India you have education system. You have either Gujarati medium, Kannada medium, but when you go to English medium, that means you step high. And cities cannot go to English medium. And that comes from all over the place, whether it is a politician telling them, whether it is a faith leader telling them, whether it is any NGOs telling them, they are not worthy of going to an English medium where they can upgrade themselves, or even to the Kannada or the Gujarat or Maharashtra medium school. It's very difficult for the cities. So what the cities do is to just stay in the forest, and what they live on is that they harvest food from the forest. They are farmers. That is mostly what they know. They are farmers. They farm in the forest. They survive in the forest. And after they've done that, they have to give the crops that they have grown to the untouchable, to take it, to sell it to them, that they can take it to go and sell it in a town to other people. When you go to India or meet even Indian people across here in London and you ask them, do you know any Africans in India? They'll tell you, yeah, the African students. But they don't know that there are Africans who are there, who are cities. And the city tribe have a problem. They've got caste system, but they don't fall under the caste system. So some of the cities' community will get a status, because in 2003, the government issued a caste, it's called scheduled tribe, for the city community. But the city community in Gujarat and Goa and Daman is a union territory, they got the status. But the cities cannot go there and also tell them that we have the right so we can get benefits like to go to schools, because they cannot provide a caste certificate. And to provide a caste certificate, you need to fall under a caste system. And that is a very difficult thing. So it is difficult for me, it was difficult for me to understand actually what and how the caste system and the certificate actually works. So the cities have to prove themselves that they fall under certain castes. And those castes is not based in the Indian constitution. So you have the policy that is changed, that the cities are now called scheduled tribes, but they cannot prove that they have a caste certificate, so they are scheduled tribes. They are cities. They cannot prove that. And that is a long process for them to also get that certificate issued. Okay, when I went to India, I met cities, some of the cities, men and women, who since 2006 have been struggling and fighting, not only with the community they live in, but with the certain government people in the towns where they live. They are fighting with the police, they are fighting with the town officers, because they're not supposed to be going to towns and to be claiming certain things or to do certain things that they were not supposed to do. They ask them, why are you here, who are you? And they have to explain themselves several times that I'm from here, I live here, and they know that they live there, but it is safe for them when they live in the forest, but it's not safe for them when they come to the towns. So it becomes a problem, and then the city community have issues because most of them cannot read nor write. So they need, when they have an issue, they have to go to a certain caste for those castes to actually tell them what they're supposed to do. And that caste, they have to pay that person, and that person will decide when he wants to do it or not. If that person doesn't support them willingly, nothing happens. And when they go and raise issues, they get thrown into prison, they get bullied, the police will be at their door, and they have issues. So most of them will decide to rather stay without saying anything or fight back, and just live in peace. Because if not, they're gonna get into trouble, some of them will be killed, and there is so many issues going around the city community in India. So we got this city young women and men who got a chance to go to certain schools, to English medium schools, when the missionaries from Africa, the students who came and supported them. So they decided to use that to fight the system, to change certain things for their situation. Most of them get into trouble, but most of them still goes on and fight and try to change certain things for their community. But it is very little that they can do, because they don't have any backup, they don't have any system that support them in their work that they are doing. So I went to meet one of them, and then they told me that there is certain elite leaders who are willingly supporting them and backing them up to fight the system, to change things for themselves. And that is something that I really appreciate. So we had our first meeting with, I have organized a first meeting with these young volunteers who are trying to fight the system, to listen to what they're saying and how they do it. And they tell me everyone comes up with different issues because different forests, different rules and different policies. So we have this, for example, these two gentlemen here are they are one of the city leaders, and that is John and Lawrence. And they've been fighting the system for a long time, but they can't go anywhere. They can't do nothing, because even when they fight the system and they take the case or something to the government office, they don't get a reply back. And anytime they go, they will tell them come back again. And anytime they go, they'll tell them come back again. And there are cases that has been there for maybe 20, 30 years and it's still there. But all of them will tell you that they've been there. That is what the Indians are telling them, that they were brought there 600 years. And if my question is, if they've been there 600 years, how do most of the Indians will say they don't know that there is Africans in India. They will tell you, oh yes, the students who come there. But there are Africans, Indians there who speak. They speak. Apart from the way they look, they speak and act the same like the Indians. So I met this police officer. He's a police officer. He was putting, they gave him a job as a police officer. That was the minister of sport. The lady name is called Margaret Alva. And she came to Kanakata because she was running her campaign for a minister. And then she came across the cities. And then when she came across the cities, she saw some of the cities. And most of the cities were very good in sport. So what she did is that instead of them continue in sports, for example, she placed them in different positions. She put some of them who were very good athletes, she placed them in the railway department. And then she put him in the police. And when I asked him, so how does he feel to be in the police? He said, he's just there. All he needs to do is just stay there and stand on the street every single day. That is all. Actually, he's wearing a police uniform, but he has no say as a police officer. He doesn't do nothing as a police officer. He's just do the errand runs for the other police officers. To oppress them, whereby they're standing there and saying that, just, if you do anything, we will take you guys to Africa. So they don't say nothing. They don't want to say nothing. They don't want to do nothing because they are scared that they're going to take them and put them to Africa, because Africa, there is only diseases and sickness and poor and poverty. They don't know anything or knows that Africa actually is a continent and it's a very good place. They have no idea about that. All they have is that Africa is a very illness place, very dirty, very poor, and the people are very bad and drugs. That is all they know. So every one of them is scared to call him or herself an African. But if you ask them, are you Indian? They will say, I'm Sidi. And then if you ask them, why are you Sidi? They will say, that's what the Indians said we are. They said, we are Sidis. So they give them the name, they are Sidis, and then they're not allowing them to say they are Indians, and they're not allowing them to say they are African. So that is a situation. That is something you cannot even imagine. This boy, I took a picture of him because he was sitting down and I'm looking at him and I think that is my son. Because when I look at my son, he looks exactly like him. And he's an African. But this boy doesn't know nothing. He thinks he's Indian. But he's not allowed to call himself an Indian. And he's thinking African is very bad. And I have to explain to him that Africa is not bad. And I have to tell them that most of the food that they have to buy certain seeds comes from Africa, like maize. And then it's written there, African maize. So I show them, look, it's written there, it says African maize. So if it is bad, then why are they growing this? Why are they selling this to you to grow? So we visited some schools, whereby the schools are now built according to the policies that was done in 2003. There are certain small schools in the forest. And the schools, you have, I would call them maybe the Dalits or untouchable. I don't like using that word, but the Dalits or the other castes of India. And they are the ones who are teaching the children, the city children. And when you go into the classrooms, you see the children sitting down there on the floor. And the teacher is sitting somewhere on his phone. And you tell the teacher that you want to see the children, you just say, oh yeah, come, go there, they are there. Just see them. And then you see that what the children are doing is just singing and praying. So that is what they do. Most of the children. And I did not find one city teacher who was actually there teaching the children. So I met with the Dalit leaders, that is Mr. Bilal, And I met with him, and they took me to one of only 2 days. When I found out, it was like 1.5 days left. When I found out that they did not know anything about African Liberation Day. So I started asking them, do you know anything about Martin Luther King? They said no. They only knew about Nelson Mandela. And that is the pictures they have in their walls. And so I said, okay. So I asked one of the colleagues, what do we need to do to organize African Liberation Day? And he said that we have to go through so many policies. And I've got all the documents there, and I have to apply for 15 different departments for them to give me their consent and their authorization for us to host an African Liberation Day in the forest where the cities are living. And we have to go and pay for noise, tax and everything, and we have to go forward and backwards. So what Manuel is his name, what Manuel did is that Manuel said, you know, Haja, you have to go to them now. They're not signing the documentation, then that means we cannot do it. So I go there, and when I get there, and then I ask them, what is the issue? We are celebrating. This is an official day for us. And we are celebrating. I'm here in India, and I want to be with my family, and I want to celebrate it with them. So we organized. Within 1.5 days, we organized and we invited all the Dalit leaders, the human rights leaders, and the governor from that town as well, the Kanakata state, the industrial minister. We invited him as well. So we did, and then we had a day full of lot of people coming from all different parts of the village across Kanakata, and they came, and then we did that. And then we did, I don't know the English name of that cross yellow thing, and we did that, and I put in the the Indian flag, and I wrote under there, African Indian 2017. And for me, it is very important. It's for me to show them that they have an identity. They're not lost. And I have to explain to them that there are so many people, their families out there across the ocean. And this is time for them to rise up. So for me, with the cities, what I think that would be the best way forward, it will be education. They need to have a sort of human right to stand on it. They have to have political voice. They have to have freedom that they can stand up for themselves. Yeah. And then they need to have economical right, because they are farmers. They live in the forest. They have to have all the dangers with the elephant and everything. And then the social rights. They are human beings. That is their town. That's their hometown. That's all they know. And I think they have the right to stand up for and call themselves African Indians if they want to, instead of calling themselves cities. Thank you very much.
We have Sister Isis, who's our information officer for the Global African Congress. Oh, we're going to clap everybody, great. At the middle of, beside Sister Isis, is Brother Delani from the African Emancipation Day March Committee. And to our right, but not politically, is our Brother Glenn from the Global African Congress. So our discussion is about reparations. Does everybody have the booklet? So reparations more or less likely under Trump, May, and Brexit. Who wants this? I'll give you my perspective on it. I think if we look at this issue, where we have in the UK moved to the right, we've had debates over the past year around Brexit that are translating into validating views about migrants in the UK that are outright racist, where it's today, I'll give you a little example. is there many people here in our WhatsApp group? Oh, just one, okay. That's a shame. Anyway, today I went along to a work meeting. It was about 12, going on 12 o'clock. So I was dressed in a shirt, plain shirt, simple kind of office type wear, conventional UK office wear. Going to this meeting, and I had a tag on for the organisation I work for. And I was pulled up when I saw a police car following me, and I kind of pulled over to let them go, and they pulled up behind me. The officer got out of the car, approached my car and said, "Oh, I thought you was a drug dealer." What? So I said, "Oh, what is it because I'm a black man?" He said, "No, it's because you've got glasses on." I'm serious. And it kind of gives the context where I think I'm probably the general prejudice around drug dealer. I think there's some prejudice around young people, young black men. We kind of become accustomed to that. I'm not saying that's acceptable, but we've become accustomed to that. And I do like to think I look young and virile, but I've got a bit of grey and I'm balding, so I'm obviously a aging man. And so I don't think I fit the profile in India. That's the fundamental issue. We're not even recognised in policy. Does everybody kind of grasp that? So when you're speaking to those academics and those people who have done extensive research and it kind of says that we're the untouchables and that, oh, that's so bad. No, we're not even at that point yet. We don't even exist, which kind of is reminiscent of our status in the UK, because it seems as though Africa
relied on heads of states, whether white fascist leader of the free world or Africans in the White House. An economic crisis with Europe's capitalism is not our struggle. They're always blaming migration, even for austerity. Taking on that burden by relying on political or legal demands is an error, in my opinion. It shows the skewed interpretations of how reparations will achieve justice. Institutions, both banking or others, only serve specific economic purpose. Racialised enslavement through forced labour was the capital that started modern capitalism. It proved essential for the Industrial Revolution that followed. The forced labour of enslaved Africans played a fundamental role in building both the Americas and enriching Europe. It was not designed to deliver resistance to the problems it creates. Today, we are at the brink of white supremacy collapse. America and the EU are both strained, dependent on failed war-based economies via the productions of weapons and military-industrial complex. This reflects the logic of a racist society. It depends on unlimited war. Out of the United States' 241 years of existence, founded in 1776, she has been at war for 224 of them years, approximately 94% of the time. Violent opposition, imperialism, murder are all symptoms of a twisted enslaver's logic gone too far. White liberals do not fare much better. Rather than attribute blame to government states for creating fear of refugees and Africans to explain policies that restricts the rights and liberties of all, they disguise their own guilt by diverting response for centuries of exploitation and oppression to pantomime villains. In effect, it's a hybrid white supremacy and messiah complex where we are told to be grateful for their benevolence in fighting racism. Unfortunately for them now, racism has been exposed. It is not so easy to blame others. I do not think reparations has ever been about individuals, nor the sanctimonious hypocrisy of Africans in the UK fighting for white racial self-interest. EU citizens get to visit, study, work or live here indefinitely, while our sisters and brothers from the Caribbean, Africa or Indian subcontinent do not share the same European values. I believe we need to educate and articulate arguments against EU imperialism of its member states. The economic institution played a major part in exploiting Africa, destroying countries through official support for military campaigns in Afghanistan or granting France a waiver on its economic obligations to carry out ill-thought-out attacks in Syria as a response to the Paris attacks. The EU owes a massive debt to these countries. It repeatedly allows member states to refuse sanctuary and maintain migration policies which avoids helping the neediest around the world. It drives down wages and keeps desperate people out, even if it means them drowning in the meds. Europe's free movement is about as free as Trump is the leader of the free world. We need to have our honest conversations around these racist migration policies rather than leaving it to fascists to dominate the conversation and use us as an excuse for their hate. Africa has its own plans for free movement by 2020. We need to be supporting this necessary struggle, which will enable infrastructure and self-dependence against the continued exploitation of global markets and economic superpowers. In the interest of internationalism and solidarity, unity is always key. Reparations is a must.
Thank you, Brother Glenn. Are we moving on to Brother Delani? Or? Yes?
Greetings. I'd like to greet you all, my African family, in the honorable spirit of our great and mighty African ancestors. It's a privilege and an honor to be selected to be on this panel. It is completely unexpected, and I hope I do justice to the subject. I share my brother's sentiment in his opening statement. I and we do not view reparation in the context of Trump, May, and Brexit. We do not view reparation from that prism. Reparation is not dependent or contingent on those characters or those events. Reparation is the African people's aspiration for global justice for what has been done to our ancestors. So we're going to pursue reparation with or without these individuals or circumstances. So for me, speaking on behalf of the Stop the Mangamizi campaign and also the Reparation March Committee, we don't view reparation within the context of personalities. It is a struggle and a fight that we have to win based on our own strength as a people. It is based on how well we organize and educate, and reparation is something that will have to be secure. We have to force reparation. Reparation will not be granted. And it is only by when we get our people sufficiently organized, our constituency, educated, organized, and galvanized around the issue of reparation, when the pressure will be put to bear on the British state and other perpetrators for the crime against our ancestors and the continuing Mangamizi against our people today. So, in those contexts, the work for reparation continues, and it will continue to intensify and grow, because amongst our people today, there's a growing awareness, a growing consciousness. We are becoming to know ourselves more. And as we become to know ourselves, we become aware of the injustice done to our people. And when we become understandable, when we get that understanding of what happened to us, it is a mandate on us to seek justice, not only just for the past, but for what is happening to us today. So, and I think that, without taking too much time, I don't know what the time frame I have here, but to move in a society like this, or any society that we as an oppressed people are located in, any quality education that we receive as a people is one that necessitates us taking on the campaign for justice for ourselves. Because the harm, the continuing harm that's been done to us has to stop. Right. It has to stop, and it has to be stopped through our own effort, through our own organizing and our own power. So that is how I view reparation, is through the context of our own strength, is through our own organization, is through our own unity as a people and organization working together to bring about this change that we're looking for. And I know there are many different conceptualizations of how we liberate ourselves, how we reform ourselves. But the reformation of ourselves has to continue as we fight.
Yeah.
It's not a either or. We just reform ourselves but do not fight. If you're reforming yourself, you have to become a combatant. You have to become a fighter in the struggle for liberation of your people. If you don't, there's something wrong with that education that you're receiving. So it is on those grounds, my brother and my sister, that I speak on this subject, and I'll be glad to continue on other questions that may come. Thank you.
Thank you, Brother Delani. Our next, so Glenn, you said, did you say it's less or more or less likely?
Oh, I said it doesn't make no difference whatsoever.
No difference whatsoever.
It's about us, it's not about them.
Okay, and Brother Delani is saying it doesn't make any difference.
Well, we don't see reparation in those contexts.
Yeah.
So it's irrelevant.
Yeah, those contexts is not relevant for us.
Okay, thank you. So Sister Isis.
So greetings to everybody. So yeah, that's really interesting, because when Brother Glenn started, I thought, okay, so he's going to be saying some of the things I'm saying, and then Brother Jelani came out with it, and I was sort of like, okay, so unfortunately for the audience, you're not going to hear a great divergence of opinions and views on this, because my starting point would be, well, you know, Theresa May, Donald Trump, Brexit actually has very little bearings whatsoever on the case for reparatory justice for us as Africans. So I think it's interesting, though, to note some of the things. I found the story that you introduced us to, Brother Abu, quite interesting, because, I mean, we can say yes, in the grand scheme of things, actually it makes no difference whether or not one of these, I think I liked what you said, Brother Jelani, actually it's not about personalities. Theresa May and Donald Trump are simply manifestations of political ideologies. They're not actually of any relevance in the grand scheme of things. So what we're talking about is the ideology that Theresa May and Donald Trump represent, and it's the same ideology that brought the result for Brexit, which is a neoliberal agenda, which is the sort of thing that you were talking about, Brother Glenn. So what we're talking about is reparations in a period of history where we're dominated by a neoliberal agenda. Well, I mean, that's nothing new, because this is something that has been on the boiler and has been developing since the end of what I call the Second European Tribal War in 1945, and this has built itself up, and we are where we are now. So we've got a very strong right-wing neoliberal capitalist system, and at the end of the day, when we come back to reparations, I mean, there is debate in our community as to what reparations should essentially entail. There's a legal definition, and there's quite a clear legal definition about what reparations is. Hence, there are, I don't want to sort of talk about a divide, but there are those amongst us as reparatory justice activists who are keen to get an apology. So, for example, with CARICOM, some of us were like, well, what's the point? Because, I mean, you know, if we look at where we stand, I, as a woman of African heritage, gain absolutely nothing from a white woman or white man coming up to me and saying, I'm sorry for the enslavement of your ancestors. I mean, they weren't there, I weren't there. However, in legal terms, it's the issue as to whether you need a formal apology to be able to build the case, because that's an acceptance of guilt, and then that makes the case. So there's this whole issue about what constitutes reparations. Is it a formal apology, and then there's sort of 5 legal precedents terms in reparations, which is all about non-repetition, putting people back to where they were, restitution, etc., etc. So is this a legal case for us as Africans in 2017? Are we going to realistically rely on the legal precedents of other groups who've had reparations, for example, the Jewish community, the Japanese community, I believe it was, and I can't remember who the third were, but we know that there's been a number of communities that have received financial compensation. So is that the route we're going down? And because I know in our community, one of the issues that arises a lot is this thing that people talk about that is often described as internal repair, which is this notion that as Africans there's also a need on a kind of psychological or psycho-emotional level to deal with who we are and the impact that the 600 years of enslavement of the Mahagamisi has had on our people and our identity, our mentality, etc. So there's a lot of people, and I've noticed particularly that side of things seems to be growing very much amongst the young people. So it's talking about repairing the self. So the question is, what is reparations, and whether we're talking about simply us as Africans taking for ourselves the impetus to heal ourselves, or are we talking about a wider case? My personal position is it's both. I think that yes, of course, 500, 600 years of trauma, there's a lot of work being done. I mean, for example, Dr. Joy DeGroy talks about post-traumatic, she calls it enslavement syndrome. So we look at the statistics socially, anywhere you go in the world, especially in the white world, but even in the African continent, we know the impact. So yes, of course, psychological repair is important, but I believe that it's a comprehensive package. It has to be holistic. There's a psychological, but there's also all the other things that go along with repair. So the question is, would we likely to succeed if we as Africans were to come together and take a case against the European governments for reparations? And I'm afraid I don't have the confidence in the European governments there's so many quotes to the effect that, you don't go to the oppressor and ask them for your freedom. They're not going to give you the tools that you need to free yourself. They're not going to put the formula forward for you to be able to use it for your benefit. So I don't see that we're ever, as Africans, going to be successful in for want of a better word, the white man's court, in a European-created court. I think there are other methods, and I'm not saying that those who seek to take it that way shouldn't pursue it, but I personally am not confident that they will be successful. There are people's tribunals, where people, I don't know if any of you are aware of the Russell Tribunal in Palestine, but that's where internationally, globally, Palestinian activists came together and over a few years have held a series of hearings to try the Zionist government for their crimes against the Palestinian people. So I'm thinking realistically that reparations will look more like us as Africans convening globally to actually hear the case. And for me, as I say, it really matters little who the presidents of European countries are. And Brexit is the result of it's an economic situation amongst white people, basically. There's very little bearing on us. So for me, what I would like to see is how we as Africans globally, and this is where the unity comes in, how do we, I'm a Trinidadian, so how do we in the Caribbean, I know you've got David from Barbados who's going to talk about his work, but we have quite a strong Pan-African movement in the Caribbean. We have strong Pan-African Africanist movements here in the UK and smaller groups, but we have groups in Europe, obviously North America. How do we as Africans and on the continent, how do we come together to convene a mechanism to actually have a hearing of these European governments and actually come to our own judgment on them? So for me, reparations is down to us.
We're in a time now where the unions have been weakened in the UK. So in terms of this context of neo-colonialism or neoliberalism, we're seeing a trade union movement that's taken a beating from the right wing. We see a trade union movement where people are saying, are questioning the relevance of unions. Then we've got the issue of racism, and we're seeing Pan-Africanists rise up around the world and say, racism, the focal point for racism is Afrophobia. The focal point for racism is this enormous crime against humanity, an unprecedented crime against humanity. And we're saying until this crime against humanity is addressed, nobody is going to have their issues addressed. Now, so let me come back to this issue of mobilization. What is it that makes people get up and move? So on the trade union movement, what is it that made people raise up and challenge the bosses? And in terms of Africans on the ground, what is it that makes Africans raise up and challenge? Now, what I see in the UK in terms of Africans raising up and challenging, in a way that I recognise, is the murder of Africans on the streets of England, the New Cross massacre. It's when I kind of cut my political teeth. It's the first time that I saw Africans emerge onto the streets of the UK in significant numbers, in a critical mass that made the state sit up and take notice. And the driver for that was a right-wing attack. Similarly, I was engaged in a similar kind of battle when some young men were murdered in Greenwich by right-wing fascists. And out of that, we had an uprising. I was one of the students who marched on the streets in Welling. And the nation became aware of this issue, and it hit policy. It actually hit policy. We had a situation where we had a new piece of legislation called the Race Relations Amendment Act that placed an obligation on every statutory authority to carry out a race equality assessment looking at whether their housing, whether their education, whether their healthcare was being delivered proportionately to the population around issues of race and ethnicity. So I can see that was a gain. And that gain came as a consequence, as a result of mobilization, because people were getting kicked in the arse. That's the reality of it. That the pressure of the right wing led to a response. So for me, the issue is, what is it that stimulates mobilization of people to bring about the change? So I hear the point that reparations is about Africans mobilizing and making it clear that there's an issue, and making it clear what needs to be done to address the issue. Because the reality in the UK is, for us to address this issue, when we don't run the housing associations in the UK, we don't run social housing in the UK. Most of the Africans in the UK live in social housing that's administrated by a white social grouping. That's the reality. So we need to have a conversation with them. And how do we engage in that conversation with them? By saying we can do it for ourselves. So in terms of this issue with the right wing rising and a new debate, I'm saying that it might be the case that this shift to the right brings into focus people's passions in such a way that they begin to say, you know what, we need to make sure that these housing providers provide housing equitably. That these healthcare providers need to make sure that they provide healthcare equitably. That we should be contracted to provide those services, because it's our tax money that's being used to deliver these services. So we want to be contractors in the game. And maybe this is the opportunity for that to happen. What is it? Who is it said? It was Garvey, wasn't it? I'm looking over at the cable massive, because your Garvey had to call out Garvey, wasn't it? Was it Garvey who said, "We won't know ourselves until our back's up against the wall"? Am I correct? Now, it does. I'm saying it does make a difference. I'm saying that the shift to the right provides an opportunity for consciousness to raise up. So I'm saying it is significant. So we can take questions now. Thank you.
Well, basically, just to say that I support the view that Brexit, Trump, May, they're all part of one system, so that's not really going to help us. But I think the mobilizing that actually needs to happen is the education and mobilizing of the people for black power, because you see, if we're not looking for power, we're really not going to achieve the long-term aim. Reparations isn't going to happen tomorrow. It's not a short-term thing. We've got a lot of work to do. I mean, the work has been coming and going, stopping and starting. It's an ongoing process that we all have to, wherever we can, each of us has to take some responsibility for educating those with whom we come into contact with, whether it's in our families, I don't go to church, but those who go to church, those who go wherever, mobilizing that mindset that this is an injustice that has to be rectified sometime, and we are the creators of the vehicle for that justice to come into being through black power.
In terms of the forms of reparation we're speaking about, I mean, reparation is about reparatory justice, and we're saying the 5 pillars of reparation, which is restitution, compensation, rehabilitation, guarantee of non-repetition, and satisfaction, all using to repair the African man and woman and children and family. So this is about repairing the family. So that is ultimately what we seek. So we have to be clear about what we want in reparation. And in all those areas, it's massive. We can go into for hours in restitution alone to restore people in the position they would have been if you hadn't interfered with them. That's a massive piece of operation there. And then rehabilitation, to rehabilitate our people from the 500 years of trauma that we have been undergoing and still undergoing. But I would also like to address the manner in which our brother entered the reparation. Abu, yes. In terms of, we have to make a distinction between reparation and public service, what do you call them kind of programs? Public services and social services that the government should give to has to be compelled to give to the citizens. Yes. So we don't want to confuse the two, because sometimes there's time when they tend to intermingle, so they tend to give us, welfare programs and social programs as a form of reparation. We don't want to get into that trap, that prism, to get down that road and get us off.
That's detail.
Yes, exactly. So we want to make a distinction between reparation we're speaking about, and also the court system that Sister mentioned, what we'll be using. And what we're saying right now is that we're not pursuing a court at this stage, but we would like a commission of inquiry. A commission of inquiry, an all-party parliamentary commission of inquiry for truth and reparatory justice. And this inquiry is to collect the information from our people, to collect our stories, to collect the evidence of the damage being done to us today. So that is one of the demands that we are putting forward to the British state. And how do we get to that stage? It's a process. So now, when we educate our people and we get them on board, we have the mechanism to sort out the constituency we're using a petition mechanism. So we are trying to get our people to register their interest, register their concern via a petition. And we use a Stop the Manganese petition on change.org to register so our people we can build that support and we can show a constituency for this type of action, this type of demand, and also coupling with parliamentary lobbying of Parliament to take up the case, to institute this commission in place to collect the evidence. But that's not the only thing that we're talking about. We're talking about Ubuntu Gatla, which is a People's International Tribunal for Global Justice, which is a global court made up of representatives of peoples, Africans, and other peoples around the world who have suffered from enslavement, colonialism, and all form of genocide. And we become judges in that court. But it's a global court of justice with that to be established. But it's a stage. Everything is in a stage, in a process.
Thank you, Brother Dilani. So we've got the...
As a speaker of Swahili, of which you talk about mangamezi as synonymous with slavery, because I won't tell you what that word means. That word means torture, treating, another word, there is another word in Swahili which is called kunyanyaswa. Kunyanyaswa, treating a person as if he was an animal. Animal, yeah. And that is very, very important because what we experience in slavery.
Remember, my brother, I want questions quite
I want
these guys to be held to account.
I want to contribute.
Good questions.
I mean, the question is actually what you are trying to say is that the mangamezi, which visited our ancestors during slavery, is still being practiced even today. The death in the police, the death in the police stations and psychiatric services by which people are being, black people that is, are being diagnosed as schizophrenics, a disease that is curable, so that their allegations and the credibility is completely erased as a person.
Are you saying, is your question that we should be doing something about that?
Exactly, that's what I'm trying to say.
Okay, thank you. So I'm going to take one question. I'm going to take
one more.
Okay, yeah.
One more is actually what they are talking about, this legal system by which we can gain our reparation. We cannot gain legal representation and laws which can defend us in our attempt to get reparation, because the legal system supports the system that has been exploited to us. It's not the same thing as justice or integrity and therefore truth. And therefore, that's what I cannot do. It is up to us to educate ourselves. And therefore,
The apology would set a lot of things. Once we get an apology, that's acceptance that something's gone wrong. So we take the apology, and that is the bit we should develop first, and then get on to the points that, the 5 points that he's identified. So the apology has got to be fast, and we've got to get that into the bag, because that's acceptance.
So okay, I'll phrase that as a question, and then
the 5 points mentioned earlier, I see that they're within the United Nations decade of black people's, the thing. 2015, it's a decade, people.
The decade for people of African descent, the UN's decade for people of African descent.
All of the things that was mentioned there are all inside of that United Nations declarations. Why are we not tapping into that?
Onto Union, we actually voted to leave the EU. We actually campaigned around that because we understood as a union that the EU is a neoliberal institution, a boss's club if you want, and there's no way that you can mobilise or organise as a trade union when you've got this boss's club exploiting as much as they can to make profit. So I just need to clarify that position about the trade unions. You might not be aware of that. And again, the same thing about the Race Relations Act. You might not be aware that the Race Relations Act was actually accountable to the racist immigration policy that came out at the time, which was quite stringent. I need to reference these things because one of the suggestions you made was about that we need to have further oppression to wake up, and I don't see it as being that. I do appreciate that we do need to mobilise, and again, it's I did mention that in my talk about it's not about reparations. Shouldn't be about individual strategies.
Sorry, I've kind of timekeeping issue.
Yeah,
It's not really clear exactly what you want out of reparation, and as an ordinary layperson, I think you should make it very clear what we're looking for out of this reparation we keep talking about.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Great question.
This sister took my thunder. That's why, because in response to the brother in the middle, and he was talking about services, being a separate thing. For me, if reparations isn't a part of African services and African housing and all the rest of it, what does reparation look like to the panel?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Sister Haja.
Was murdered in 2011, just down the road, one of our brothers taken out. Now, I was a part of the campaign and I supported that campaign and saw it through. I went to the inquest. I watched those families' faces in disappointment and the tears and the horror when it was so obvious that Mark had been murdered by the racist British police. We all know this. I don't think there's any of us who don't know this. We relied on the courts, we went there, and we didn't get justice. So for me, it's like, yes, of course, we can take a legal case, but as Brother Jelani is saying, there are alternatives. And I think the point is that we need to show that we are empowered enough, that we are organised enough, that we can defend ourselves, that we can set up our own mechanism or our own medium for hearing the case for reparations, and then we can take it forward. But the main thing is not to hang our hopes on getting justice from the European system.
Thank you. Okay. Analysing people is about catching people where they're at, what they're prepared to move with. I've grown children, and one of the things for me about my children is when you put theory to them, they don't really respond to it. I put to my children there's a thing called racism. My children came back to me with these neoliberal ideas that they had around their school, that everybody's equal in their school and there's no racism thing going on. It's only when they get a kick in their ass that they realise that there is a thing called racism and they need to deal with it. So we've got to really get to the point of moving people from where they are. And moving people from where they are is about the things that motivate them. If we come along with theoretical constructs that we're going to build something and this fantastic process, most people shut off. So when people are asking what reparations is, for me reparations is about us having equitable access to housing, which means that we're able to put pressure on those people who are housing us now. That we're able to put pressure on those people who are providing healthcare to us now. That we're able to put pressure on those people who are providing education or so-called education to our children. So there's something about doing what we can in the now and being in organisations that can do that. And I'll say the organisation to be involved in is the Global African Congress. So whatever you're doing, be a part of the Global African Congress. I'll do that in a minute.